Hello and welcome to this Connect with Remedy webinar, where we're going to be looking at the new server group log management feature that's being introduced in Remedy 9.1 Service Pack 4. My name's Mark Walters and I've been supporting the Remedy platform and application for more than 15 years. We're going to start by considering the challenges faced by customers when trying to manage logs on the systems that make up their server groups. We'll introduce some new concepts we need to be aware of when using the new feature, and then we'll look at some use cases to show how the forms can help before moving on to a demonstration of how to use them. We're all familiar with the server information form, which is where most of our log management is done today. The options being set here are specific to the individual server that the form is loaded from. This works well when there are only a small number of servers, but as the size of the server group grows, it becomes increasingly complex and time-consuming to work this way. For example, server groups commonly use load balancers to distribute traffic across servers, so it becomes necessary to bypass these to access each system. Some customers even resort to direct connections using the user tool to make this easier. Remedy 9 introduced the centralized configuration forms, and whilst these made it possible to set logging options for all servers from one location, it still requires repeating the same actions for each server. Also, the interface is much less intuitive in that you need to know the configuration setting names and values to set the correct options. Another problem with both of these methods is that because we have to perform the same tasks multiple times, it's easy to make a mistake and end up with inconsistent settings across the servers. When this happens, you can be certain that the server you missed is the one where the activity you want to log will happen. Service Pack 4 introduces the new Server Group Log Management form, which can be used to view and set the logging options across one, some, or all of the servers in your group. We'll see examples of this in the demonstration shortly, but you'll see that the form is very similar to the layout the server information form we're familiar with uses. The main difference is the addition of the Apply Setting switches, which are used to determine which options are actually committed to the servers when the Apply button is pressed. Before we look at this in detail, we need to be aware of some new settings and concepts. Firstly, the log file names used on the form do not include a path. A server group may include both Windows and Linux platforms, which use different formats for specifying directory paths. To support this, the form uses a relative path. The default is still the usual DB directory, but this can now be changed for individual servers using the common logging root path configuration setting. Server name lists are used to group together servers that you may want to apply common settings to. Consider a large server group with multiple user-facing integration or other servers with dedicated functions. You can create a named list of these servers and then apply the same log settings to all of them with just one click. This helps ensure that the same logs are collected from all servers, making management easier and reducing the risk of missing logs. We're going to see the new form in action by looking at these use cases. We'll start with an overview of the form and its key features before looking at how it can be used to view the log settings that are currently in place on the servers in a group. We'll see how to modify the settings for individual servers and then apply them to all servers. We'll also see how the server name lists are managed and used. Finally, we'll look at how log templates enable you to save common log settings so that you can easily reuse them. The log management and server name list forms are both accessed from the new Server Group Administration link on the application flyout menu. The log management form looks similar to the server information form that we're all already used to. We have checkboxes for enabling and disabling logs, file name boxes, and log levels where appropriate. The main difference are the Apply Setting toggles down the left-hand side. These are used to determine which ones of these settings are actually applied to the servers when the Apply button's clicked. It's worth noting at this point at the bottom here that these 4 logs can't be enabled or disabled via this form as they're actually permanently enabled by the various components. We can still set the name and change the log level, but we can't turn the logs on or off. At the top of the form here, we can choose whether we load the current settings from a server or from a template. Here we choose which server to apply the settings to, all of our servers, one of them, or one of our server name lists. We also have an advanced settings toggle, which allows access to some of the less commonly used features, such as the log file sizes, log rotation, and log filtering functions. So let's start by having a look how we would load the settings from an existing server. Perhaps we want to just review what's currently in use. So we can choose the server toggle, and then we get a drop-down menu showing the servers that are part of our server group. So on the first server, we can see that API escalation and filter logging are enabled to a single file. On our second server, just the API logs are enabled. It's worth noting at this point the Java plugin log setting. Because a server can have more than one Java plugin server, we can't use a single file name. So what you'll find is if you use this option to set the files to disable or enable logs, the system will use the port number of the plugin server as part of the file name. So as an example, in this case, the Java plugin logs is set to use a file called java_plugin.log. If we go through the plugin configuration forms, you'll see that on the servers we have Java plugin log underscore and then the port numbers that are in use. So this is one of the Atrium plugins. This is the default plugin server that usually runs on port 9999. The files are still in the DB directory or the default log directory that you set, but they have the port number to allow you to distinguish between them. So we can see how easy it is to load the settings from an existing server to review what they're currently set to. Now let's say we actually want to make a change on one of these servers. We can either start with a clear template and explicitly set just the logs that we want, or we can load the server settings as they currently stand and make any necessary changes. So let's add SQL logging. We already have API, escalation and filter going to a single file, so let's also add SQL logging to that file name. So we've enabled the log, we've set the log file name. Now we need to toggle the apply settings switch. These ones that remain in red, these settings won't be sent to the server, so no changes will be made when the apply button's pressed. Only those settings where the toggle has been changed to green will be applied. So we need to choose which server we want to send the settings to. We loaded them from this server, that's the one we want to change. So let's pick from the server menu and click apply. We get confirmation that the settings were applied, and we can confirm that by clearing the data and loading the information again from the server. There, for logs SQL combi. Okay, so now let's imagine we want to turn off these logs. How would we do that? Let's do that again just on a single server. We already have the information loaded from the server, so we want to disable these logs. But we also need to remember that we need to choose the settings we're actually applying. So we've unchecked the boxes to show we're disabling the logs, and we've switched these to green to show that these are the settings that we want to send. No changes are being made to whatever the current settings for the remainder of the logging options are. Again, we're sending to a single server, that server apply. Again, let's double check by clearing the information and loading. Log file remains because we didn't change the name, but the logging is actually turned off. So that's how we can review and set the logs for a single server. And how about all servers? So let's imagine we want to turn off API logging across all of our servers. Let's clear the form to start with. We want to turn off API logging. It's currently disabled here, but we need to remember to actually send the setting, to apply the setting to the server, so that when the apply button's now clicked, we will send a setting to disable the log. But we want to enable server group logging. So in summary, we are turning off API logs, we're turning on server group logs to sg.log, and we're not making any changes to all of the other settings. And we're now going to apply this to all of our servers. Okay, wait for the confirmation, and then we can go through and check on each of the servers what we now have in effect. So API logging was disabled, server group logging enabled. So that shows how you can review the settings, apply the settings to a single server or to all servers. The next thing we want to have a look at are the server name lists. Now this is used, imagine a situation where you have a large server group, perhaps with multiple user-facing servers, servers for integrations, and maybe some for other purposes, smart IT or web services integrations. It's not always easy from the server names, depending on the standards that you may have in place in your company. It's not always obvious what each one of these servers may be for. They're just names in this case. So the server name list menu allows us to set up and manage, to collect together those servers that we want to apply the settings to. So again, on the server group administration menu, go to the server group name list link. At the moment, we don't have any server name lists set up, so let's create one. Let's say we want to set up a server name list for our user-facing servers. And two of our servers are considered user-facing. And let's say the remaining server is an integration server. So the name lists that you've set up are displayed in the table below, and you can expand them to see the members. So we have a server name list called integration, consisting of one server, and one called user-facing, which consists of two. So if we now go back to the log management form, clear the information. So let's say we've opened a case with BMC support and we've been asked to collect API, SQL and filter logs into a single file from a problem being reported by our users. We know that the workflow in question isn't being used on the integration server, so we don't need to worry about setting the logs setting the logs enabled on that system, because we don't want to collect them. So we want to collect API, escalation and filter. Sorry, not escalation, API, filter and SQL logs. We want to put them into a single file. And rather than apply to all servers or to have to go to each server individually and apply them, we can choose from our server list. And it's our user-facing servers that we want to apply these changes to. So now when we have a look, we can see that that server has those options enabled, and whatever was in place on this server remains set. We made no changes to that system. So you can see how useful that would be. The larger your server group grows, and the more use you will get from this. So it very easily allows you to group together systems of servers and not have to worry about which one is which. You can just rank them or order them group them by their purpose. So the next thing we want to have a look at is templates. Now it's all very well switching these individual logging options on and off, and although it's quite simple and quite straightforward to just make simple changes, let's imagine that you had a particular set of logs that you use frequently. Rather than having to keep coming in, individually selecting which ones want to be turned on and off, setting the log file names, remembering which ones to apply, we could use a template. So the Manage Templates form allows us to create a template that contains the settings that we want to save. So let's say we're going to create. We could load the settings from a server or an existing template if we already had them set and we know that we wanted to use them. But let's create them from scratch. So let's create a let's call it SQL API combined file. Combined log. So we're going to turn on API and SQL, and we're going to put those to a single log file. Let's save that template. Let's imagine we also wanted to have a quick way of turning off all of our logs to make sure, once we'd finished doing our logging, we want to turn everything off to save the overhead of generating the logs and the space that would be used. So let's create a new template called all off. In this case, we want to make sure that none of these options are selected because we're not enabling the log, we're disabling it, but we do want to apply the settings. So when this template is used and the apply button's clicked, we're sending to the server the option to disable all of these logs. We'll save that template. If you want to come in here and review the templates we have, again we can load the settings from the all off template, can load the settings from the SQL API combined log. Let's go back and see how these are now used. So first of all, let's say we've been asked to turn on the SQL and filter logging or SQL API logging for those servers. So we're going to load from a template, SQL API combined, and then we're going to apply that to all servers. Done. We've now completed our logging and we want to turn all of the logs off. So we can load from a template and apply. So let's have a look and see. We should now find that the logs are disabled on all of our servers. One other thing to note about the template management is that the templates are additive. So for example, if we also wanted to create a template for user logging, which included perhaps user and let's say alert logging. Save that template. When we load the data from a template, we start with the SQL API combined. If we then select the user logging, it adds into the screen, adds into the form. It combines the two templates. When you load a template, it doesn't automatically overwrite all of the existing settings. It simply combines the two. So that allows you to build up combinations of templates, which may be useful. If you don't want to do that, you just have to remember to use the Clear All button before loading the information to get the options that you want. That concludes our review of the logging form, the server name lists, and the templates. The links here contain more information on Remedy 9.1 Service Pack 4, including the release notes documenting new features and defects that have been fixed. Also, the server group log management documentation is linked. And finally, details about past and future Connect with Remedy webinars. Thank you for taking the time to watch this Connect with Remedy webinar.